grappling with, I think, for a while. And this new California law, it, like you said, it applies to retailers with 500 staffers or more, so it's not going to apply to your mom and pop type of shop. And it's going to require that they make gender-neutral toy aisles, regardless of whether toys in the past were marketed to a boy or, say, a girl. So yeah, it's going to be a lot more inclusive to all genders, whereas we might associate now boys like the color blue and play with trucks, and girls like Barbies and play with dolls. This kind of seeks to disrupt that whole mission. And it's something the industry, in some ways, has been tiptoeing toward, in that there have been other efforts to do this. So around the same time, earlier this month, Lego published some research from the Gina Davis Institute on Media that kind of looked at children's play trends, and it showed that girls got less constrained by gender biases in toys than boys did, which is kind of interesting. So that research came out, the California law was passed, which is going to start to be enforced in 2024. There are just some things to throw this issue further into the forefront, and I think it's safe to say that as a society, we're generally looking at this idea of gender more and with how people identify and whatnot, and obviously that's going to translate into just consumer products and our daily lives.
Right, yeah, that research from Lego was pretty interesting. They surveyed about 7,000 parents and children in 7 different countries, and for the boys, 74% of boys thought that some activities were meant just for boys or girls. 62% of girls believed that. So, as you mentioned, kind of the effort to kind of dissipate some of that thinking. And what we've seen already, though, is that a lot of retailers and toy makers have already started this trend. They've already been picking up on this stuff. You mentioned Mr. Potato Head. They dropped the Mr. from that. But just even with other toy lines and things, that has already been started.
Very true. Like the Toy Association, for example, stopped in 2017. They stopped giving the award for Best Boy Toy and Best Girl Toy. So that was kind of a step in that direction. Target stopped kind of orienting its aisles towards gender, so that was something also. That was in 2015 that they started working on that. So it's been a really interesting pivot for some of these companies. I think you can argue that these are, all small piecemeal steps, but together they can kind of speak to something larger. A professor I was talking to kind of noted that, and she said, though, she also makes a really good point. This is Rebecca Haynes from Salem State University. She made a really good point. She said there's still room to make progress on being inclusive. She noted, for example, we could show boys and girls playing together in advertising, that would be a step in the right direction. That means, like a toy catalog. So there are things like that. I think if this toy market wants to push further, that they're probably going to have to do. People have also pushed back, it's important to note, against the California law and other things like this. Governor Greg Abbott in Texas tweeted basically that this is government overreach. So not everyone's in favor of moving in this direction. It's really important to also note, I think.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on KFI AM 640 and everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about the effort to eliminate gender bias in toys and toy marketing.
Hey, it's Neil Saavedra. New windows for your home bring light, beauty, efficiency. I know this firsthand because the French doors and stunning kitchen windows from American Vision Windows are some of the most dramatic and beautiful changes to our home. Y'all know Bill and Kathleen's story, right? They had such a horrible experience. When they replaced their windows years ago, they started their own company. Fast forward, 20 years later, they're still bringing warmth, light, and beauty to homes like mine. For a limited time, American Vision Windows will pay the tax plus 0 payments until 2023. Tax based on material only on purchase of 8 or more windows, cannot be combined with any other offer, on approved credit. Some restrictions apply. Offer expires November 30th, 2021. CSLB number 778326. Trust the window company my family trusts, my friends trust. American Vision Windows. Give them a call. Get that free estimate. 888-226-9908. That's 888-226-9908. Or visit AmericanVisionWindows.com.
Contractor license 1023-790. Kenny, I heard Gettle Air Conditioning has an irresistible offer for everyone out in Radio Land. We do, Zach. We do. Well, tell me about it. Rejuvenation. But the summer's about over. I know. That's why the time is now. You're going to have to explain that. If you have electric heat, your heater is just your air conditioner running backwards all winter. You're saying it needs some refreshment? Yeah. And if you have gas heat, now is the time to make sure your AC is in tip-top shape and restored to factory specs so that you can turn it on with confidence when the desert heat returns in a couple of months. Rejuvenation. Rejuvenation. How much? Just $129. That's a great deal. Great deals are what I'm known for, Zach. Really? I thought you was mostly known for having a dog named Sadie. Well, that's it. Yell. Goetcl. Sadie said to say hello, by the way.
Save big. Go solar American style with Semper Solaris. Semper Solaris is your local veteran-owned solar and battery storage contractor. Add Tesla Powerwall and be ready for blackouts. We get the job done with esprit de corps and honor. Semper offers new AC systems with a lifetime warranty and new roofs with a 50-year warranty. We hire vets and give back to the community with our Semper Cares initiative. Go solar and declare your independence. No down, interest, or payments till 2023. Get the federal 26% solar and battery tax credit. $500 downloadable coupon. $500 off for military, first responders, and healthcare workers. Call 877-211-5591. That's 877-211-5591. Or visit SemperSolaris.com. 26% federal tax credit based on eligibility. Consult your tax advisor. Cannot be combined with any other offers. Some restrictions apply. New customers only. Call or see website for details. Expires 11/30/2021. CSW number 978152.
Yes, I know. I have a calming demeanor. You know, when it's your job, basically, to push people beyond their comfort zones, it's good to make them feel as safe as possible. Like an open-heart surgeon for your home. You'll do fine. No worries. We got it.
Home with Dean Sharp, the House Whisperer, this morning at 9 on KFI AM 640.
More stimulating talk.
This is KFI AM 640. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. Going back to what you mentioned about having boys and girls play with toys together, I don't know why. The first example that came into my head was, slime and things like that, and I would see a bunch of commercials of both boys and girls playing with those things, and I just looked to my own nieces and nephews. They both love those things. My nieces do, my nephew does, and they play together with them. So, maybe that is kind of one of those things that help kind of bridge that gap. Kids see groups of kids playing with things, boys and girls, and they'll be more likely to go that way. And as far as the California law, this was proposed by California Assemblyman Evan Lowe. How did that whole thing started?
That's a great question. So, yes, Evan Lowe authored this bill, and what he told me was that one of his staffers said they were shopping with their daughter, and their daughter raised the issue of why to find a dinosaur or a periodic table do I need to go into the boys section? And it's a very valid question, this is a perfect example of kids who they start to see what's sort of imposed on them by somebody their age. And so I talked to another parent who actually was in New York. She has two girls, and she was very in favor of the law. I think it's safe to assume not all parents are in favor of this. It's similar to, we noted, Governor Abbott is not, but some people definitely are.
Yeah, it's very interesting, as you mentioned, to see what effect this could have, especially in California. It's kind of like the test subject, the test route for this. But even the Toy Association that you mentioned earlier said there's so many products that are already grouped by category. They're not specifically catered to gender already. They don't expect such a big change. But still, as you mentioned, kind of with that blue and pink type style and that merchandising, maybe there could be some changes. But an interesting look, and we'll see how it plays out in California. Allison Prang, reporter at the Wall Street Journal, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
On the pandemic front, we could very soon be seeing mass firings across the country as deadlines for vaccine mandates approach. The federal government, certain states, and private companies have faced opposition from employees as some are still resisting their shots for a variety of reasons. But what happens after that? Disruptions to some essential services could occur as rehiring and training may lag. Firefighters, police, and nursing staff are not so easily replaced. For more on all this, we'll speak to Pedro Gonzalez, Associate Editor at Chronicles Magazine.
I think it's important to note that all of this is unprecedented in the sense that we are purging people that we would otherwise consider essential frontline workers, nurses, doctors, firefighters, paramedics, military officers, police officers. These are all people that are not easy to, one, recruit, two, train, and in general replace. Right. And yet we seem pretty ready to fire a lot of them. And In upstate New York, for example, so many nurses resigned over the vaccine mandate that this hospital had to stop delivering children. Kaiser Permanente placed more than 2,000 employees nationwide on unpaid leave. Other hospitals have done very similar things, mass firings, or the euphemism is unpaid leave, because what follows next is usually complete termination. My experience has been that, for the most part, firefighters, police officers, and people in the military are really reluctant to talk about this. Not because they don't want to talk about it, but because they're afraid of their supervisors, of their city governments, or of their in the case of the military, it's their senior leadership. But in the case of firefighters and law enforcement, oddly enough, it's their unions as well. In other words, the groups that are supposed to advocate on their behalf are totally against them. And they're working with their superiors and local governments to basically stifle dissent. And again, in many cases, it was difficult to just get people to talk to me, and to include their information in the article, I had to make sure that it couldn't come back to them. That is how afraid police officers and people in the military are of their own leadership right now. Just for asking for religious exemptions that are denied, and this is the other feature of this story that has really been underreported, is that it doesn't seem to be the case that in these worlds of law enforcement and military, the leadership structures are handling applications for religious exemptions in good faith. In fact, in some instances, people are told ahead of time, don't even bother filing, because you're not going to get it, right, and we're not going to give it to you.
You know, we've covered a lot of this stuff on the podcast before, and employers, obviously the federal government, they all have very wide latitude when it comes to accepting or rejecting these religious exemptions, and the same thing with mandating the vaccine. So I know that a lot of these people are just kind of put in a difficult position. I know there's a lot of lawsuits out there as well. Who knows how those will bear out, but they're all in very tough positions, and as you mentioned, we're already seeing some of those firings. And you did mention, right, the unpaid leave, right, that's the next step, is that termination. So that's going to be all coming down the line. You did speak to a number of firefighters, which I thought was interesting, talking about how, you know, some of them are given some accommodations maybe, but they're put on like segregated rigs. So they're not even there to be able to completely fulfill their duty, let's say, right? They're just giving them, you know, other assignments, things that they're not necessarily there to be doing.
Yeah. So in Beverly Hills, a firefighter I spoke to named Josh Satley told me that even if you're lucky enough to get an exemption and you comply with the mandates like wearing a mask at work and testing regularly because you're vaccinated, you are put on a rig that is not allowed to respond to medical emergencies, only fire calls. And so what does that mean? It means that there are parts of the city that will go uncovered by medics, because you only have, paramedics are in short demand. Even before the pandemic, right, there were nationwide shortages of firefighters, medics, and cops, of these first responders. And so, again, this is not someone that you can just replace in a matter of a few weeks. The courses for becoming a paramedic, that kind of thing takes a while. Same with police. And so that's happening now. Of course, cities are not going to talk about this, and I think it's going to be suppressed until you just can't suppress it anymore. But I was told by one police officer that he called an ambulance for a medical emergency, and it took 2 hours for the ambulance to arrive. And this is in a city where you're having this issue now where they're starting to kind of separate people based on whether or not they're vaccinated, unvaccinated. I mean, you're already starting to see the effects of this. And for the people that don't think that this affects them, and maybe they're secretly glad that someone who refused to get vaccinated is going to get fired, well, it's going to affect you when you call the police or when you call an ambulance, maybe, right, depending on how many people are still working in the city.
Totally, and that's the next point, right? What happens when people are fired? To your point earlier, you just can't hire somebody and they're going to start on the job, in a week or so. It takes time for all that. The training is intensive, right? I think you mentioned in one of the cases, police officer isn't a full-fledged independent police officer until they're 2 years on the job. So there's a lot of interesting things like that where there could be delays in these essential services. And you're right. I mean, we're probably not going to hear about it until it reaches a fever pitch, and we're really seeing some disruptions in those services.
Yeah, in San Francisco, it's funny because the firefighters and the police I spoke to said that if the city eventually decides to accommodate people for exemptions, it's not going to be because of firefighters, cops, and medics. It's going to be because of the municipal transportation agency. Because of all the different municipal departments, the one department that has the most people appealing for exemptions is the department that oversees the San Francisco region's massive transit system. It's something like 11% of their workforce is asking for exemptions. And if San Francisco actually goes through with this and fires these people or puts them on unpaid leave, you're looking at massive service disruptions for buses and trains. That is what is, ironically, that's what's upsetting people in San Francisco, and what is maybe going to be the thing that saves all the other departments from these purges. But this is going to affect everyone, I think. So, but we're not really talking about this. In many cases, we're being really callous towards these people. But a point that I make in my article, and a point that all of these people made to me, was I worked through the surge and through the pandemic before vaccines were even available. Like firefighters, cops were telling me, like, I kept going to work, even, and if we got sick, we took the allotted time off, and we came back to work and we kept doing our jobs. And now, because we're asking in good faith for religious exemptions, we're being fired. I mean, I can't imagine being in that position, especially if you're like a veteran that's been doing this for, 20 years or whatever, and you live through this stuff, and now you're just getting a pink slip.
Pedro Gonzalez, Associate Editor at Chronicles Magazine, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on KFI AM 640 and everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'll be back with some more top stories from the week, but first, let's get an update from the KFI newsroom.
KFI News on the hour, on the half, and when it breaks. I'm Brian Bruman from the KFI 24-hour newsroom. The U.S. and European Union have reached an agreement to settle their diplomatic disagreement over steel and aluminum taxes implemented by former President Trump. In 2018, the Trump administration placed taxes on EU steel and aluminum, saying the foreign products produced by American allies were a threat to U.S. national security. Europeans and other allies weren't happy about it, and that led to counter taxes on U.S.-made motorcycles, bourbon, peanut butter, and jeans. LA Animal Services says its shelters are nearing capacity, and they're urging you to foster or adopt. Animal Services has 6 locations filled with dogs and cats, puppies and kittens who are spayed and neutered, vaccinated, microchipped, and ready for new forever homes. SoCal weather from KFI brought to you by Forever 21. Low clouds and fog near the coast, partly cloudy by the afternoon, highs in the 60s to low 70s at the beaches, upper 60s to mid-70s in Metro LA and OC, upper 60s to mid-70s in the inland valleys, and low to mid-70s in the Inland Empire. We lead local from the KFI 24-hour newsroom. I'm Brian Bruman.
Checking KFI traffic, we do have a crash in the Ontario area. It's going to be on the 10 eastbound at Haven, that's in the right lane. New Mid-City on the 10 eastbound at Vermont, a crash blocking the right lane. To Ontario, with some road work on the 10 westbound between Haven and 4th Street, the 2 right lanes toned off until 5 a.m. Monday. KFI in the sky, help get you there faster. I'm Jonathan White.
Mark your calendar. Forever 21 is opening a new store at the Shops at Mission Viejo during their grand opening event on Saturday, October 30th. Shop exclusive deals and get a free tote bag. Valid from October 30th while supplies last, subject to change without notice. See store for details.
San Manuel Casino is changing its name and changing the game. San Manuel Casino is now Yamava Resort and Casino at San Manuel, with 2 new casino floors, now with over 6,500 slots, the most in the West. A new high limit room for 5 elevated gaming experiences, new luxury retail shops, restaurants and bars, and even more thrills to come. Experience a level of thrill that California has never seen before. San Manuel Casino is now Yamava Resort and Casino at San Manuel. Details at yamava.com. Must be 21. Please gamble responsibly.
Has COVID-19 made it hard to pay your rent or utilities? Are you worried about eviction? Get the help you need now. The California COVID-19 Rent Relief Program covers 100% of your unpaid rent and utilities to help you remain in your home. Apply for rent relief now and let your landlord know you've applied so you can avoid eviction. The application is fast and you won't be asked about citizenship. Apply today at housingisfree.com or call 833-430-2122. Sponsored by the state of California.
Panera believes in saying yes to the good things. Yes to mac and cheese. Yes to topping it with cheesy Parmesan crisp. And yes to putting it all on a sandwich. The new grilled mac and cheese sandwich. Get $1 delivery when you order on the app. Panera. Live your yes. Restrictions apply.
As life returns to normal, our worries have not disappeared, but evolved. CalHope offers free COVID-19 emotional support. Call 1-833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org today.
Donate your car at carsforkids.org. That's Cars for the Cat. Pick up is quick and easy. You'll also get a vacation voucher and a tax deduction. Donate your car for good.
Also accepting real estate donations. There's red, blue, and then there's you. You're a free thinker and believe the best idea should win, no matter whose idea that is. At KFI AM 640, we give you all the news you need and a variety of opinions. You make up your own mind. Beholden to no one. Live, local, and independent, KFI AM 640 is made for independent thinkers like you.
This is KFI AM 640, heard everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. Election Day is quickly approaching on November 2nd, and this time around, police are on the ballot in Minneapolis. If passed, the ballot initiative called Question 2 would replace the police department with the Department of Public Safety that could include officers, but also mental health and substance abuse experts to respond to calls. This new department would be overseen by the mayor and the city council, giving them more power in the situation. But residents and public officials are split on the subject. For more on how this all might play out, we'll speak to Janelle Griffith, national reporter at NBC News.
So question 2 basically asks residents whether they want to replace the Minneapolis Police Department with a new Department of Public Safety. Now, critics of this measure say that this is just an attempt to defund the police, to get rid of the police chief, and to get rid of the police department in its entirety. But the people who petitioned for this item to get on the ballot, they said that that's not true. They said that police officers will obviously have to exist in the city because there will always be a need for an armed response in certain incidents. But what they want for this measure to do, should it pass, is to allow for social workers, for mental health experts, for people experienced in dealing with the homeless and issues of that nature to be able to respond to certain situations, because homeless encampments are an issue across the country, including in Minneapolis. Mental health issues people are suffering from there and dealing with. And so they want for a comprehensive team to be set up so that it's not just armed officers responding to every single incident, which is pretty much what it is now. And they believe that it clearly doesn't work, so they think the city needs to revisit how they approach public safety.
And those were a lot of the calls that we had seen after protests were going on to set up that type of system, or at least put more effort and money into that other side of things, the social workers and all that stuff. Now, this is interesting because a lot of the specifics are a little vague still, and even the specifics of what that new department would look like would give more power really to the mayor and city council there. I mean, they will be the ones who decide who would be the commissioner and how it's all set up. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting angle to it.
It is, and what's also interesting is that the current mayor, Jacob Frey, he is opposed to it. He is running for a second term, and he opposes this. He has said publicly that he doesn't believe that whoever is in charge of law enforcement should have to respond to an entire city council, so 13 people in addition to the mayor, which is what would happen if this measure were to pass. Currently, the mayor holds all authority over the police department, but several members of the city council, as well as many residents and organizations there, feel that that's not appropriate. It shouldn't just be one person who has complete control over the police department. And critics of the current mayor say that he has not done enough to clamp down on the police department, and so they believe that with more oversight, including the city council,
it would change things in the city and it would improve the relationship between police and residents there.
That's a difficult one, right? I mean, you could get that case of too many cooks in the kitchen, too many people involved could also go the other way. You know, it's such a complicated issue. What do the polls say? How is this idea faring so far?
What's interesting is that there haven't been a ton of polls done on it, but one of the recent ones done by a collective of media outlets in Minneapolis showed that the majority of residents do support this measure. At least the residents surveyed as part of this poll, that 49% said that they supported replacing the police department and giving the city council more authority over public safety. 41% said they opposed, and 10% were on the fence. They were undecided. But it seems like people are open to this idea, and some people believe that the death of George Floyd helped to get more people closer to the conversation who were maybe outliers or who just didn't really think that the police department posed a threat to residents there. Some of the people I spoke to for my article, they said that city council members, some of them, and residents have been calling for years for there to be an overhaul of the police department and public safety in the city. But George Floyd's death definitely invited other people to the conversation, not just locally, but internationally and nationally as well.
And some of the people you spoke to also, you know, to this point, obviously this would be a new system to be set up, and they say that there's a lot of unknowns. They don't want to be a test subject in this type of action, right? We'll have to rebuild from scratch. You know, it could be a total success, right? But what if it's a complete failure and they voted for it? And so there are a lot of people still are on the fence with it, don't know how to approach it just yet.
I will say that pretty much all of the residents that I spoke to while I was in Minneapolis, I was there for a week, and no one really that I spoke to said that they were thrilled with the current state of public safety there or with how the police department has operated over the years. They do believe that there are some changes that should be made, but what it comes down to is what those changes look like. Not everyone wants to just establish this brand new department. And I spoke to the Minnesota Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who you'll recall, it was his office that prosecuted Derek Chauvin and landed a conviction that sent him to jail he'll be in jail for more than 2 decades. But he said he's actually in support of the measure, and he said it's time for change, and he understands that change can be scary and people may be reluctant. They may want to stay with something they know, even though they know that it's not working and they know that it's unhealthy. But he said he would encourage people to embrace change because he thinks that if the community really puts their heads together and finds a way to improve conditions there, he thinks that everyone will feel safe in the city and that it could just improve the standing of the police department and make residents feel safer there.
This is going to be a very interesting one to see how it plays out. Question 2 in Minneapolis. There's going to be a lot of eyes on this one. Election day rolls around. Janelle Griffith, national reporter at NBC News. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's Halloween, and that means it's time for spooky movies. And horror movies in general have had quite the evolution. Some of the best horror movies have acted as mirrors, reflecting our own fears of the time back at us, and built upon each other to get us where we are today. From the early days with the classic movie monsters, to the slashers and serial killer flicks, all the way to modern horror movies. They've all been commentaries on what's going on in the world at the time. The next step will be to see how the pandemic impacts the horror movie genre. For more on the horror century of movies, we'll speak to Asia Romano, culture writer at Vox.
I think it's great that you love horror. I think a lot of people do love horror and instinctively recognize that about horror, that, you know, there's something about a movie that looks at what we fear and what we're afraid of and that kind of gets at this collective subconscious anxiety, right? Sometimes we may not really understand what we're afraid of until we see a horror movie that allegorizes it for us, right? And I think we see that throughout the cinema century. If we look back at sort of the trajectory of these films, you know, from like the monster movies of the Universal era, right, where these monsters were sort of standing in for very like concrete things, through to like the more allegorical films of like the 60s and 70s, and even now today, there's lots of movies that are really nebulous and metaphorical and really kind of cool in the way that the more abstract they are, the more you can like read into them and project your own fears onto them.
And the future of movies, right? We're going to be seeing so many pandemic-related things that we're already seeing something. I mean, this kind of is a big inflection point, I believe, for this type of genre going forward. Dark things of what we did on lockdown, all sorts of stuff is gonna start coming out, in that sense. So let's start, because you, as I mentioned, you kind of lay through movies over the decades and everything. Pre-war Hollywood, the big monster type movies popularized by Universal Studios, Dracula, Frankenstein. We're looking at actors like Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney. How did these play out?
Films like these, are being made after World War I, right? And so people are really kind of reeling from the first modern war, right? So you have things that are sort of, like, since a lot of the plots of these movies are kind of pitting the old world against the new world, right? Like this idea of tradition being obliterated in the wake of modernity and modern cities, and lots of these monsters, these supernatural creatures, kind of invading these really urbane cosmopolitan cities and just sort of taking over everything.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on Kfi Am 640. When we come back, we'll tell you how horror movies have evolved, reflecting back our own fears at the time.
Here to announce the all-new, all-electric Ford F-150 Lightning is Hall of Fame running back Eric Dickerson.
I drive an F-150 myself, and I love it.
Well, F-150 Lightning's got everything you love about yours and more, like the Pro Power onboard generator that can power your tailgate or home.
Sounds like the truck of the future.
You heard it here first. Reserve your 2022 Ford F-150 Lightning today at buyfordnow.com.
And visit your Southern California Ford dealer.
Save big. Go solar American style with Semper Solaris. Semper Solaris is your local veteran-owned solar and battery storage contractor. Add Tesla Powerwall and be ready for blackouts. We get the job done with esprit de corps and honor. Semper offers new AC systems with a lifetime warranty and new roofs with a 50-year warranty. We hire vets and give back to the community with our Semper Cares initiative. Go solar and declare your independence. No down, interest, or payments till 2023. Get the federal 26% solar and battery tax credit. $500 downloadable coupon. $500 off for military, first responders, and healthcare workers. Call 877-211-5591. That's 877-211-5591. Or visit SemperSolaris.com. 26% federal tax credit based on eligibility. Consult your tax advisor. Cannot be combined with any other offers. Some restrictions apply. New customers only. Call or see website for details. Expires 11/30/2021. CSW number 978152.
Contractor license 1047-781. Duck and Goodrich taught Kenny to do things the right way, not the easy way. And now, every ghetto technician has a digital assistant named Duncan. Digital Duncan is a genius, just like his namesake. Back during the Cold War, the U.S. government came to my dad and said, "We need you to build a giant freezer at the test site and bring it down to 50 degrees below zero." They wanted to make sure their nuclear triggers would function if they had to send warheads to Russia during the wintertime. So Dad designed a cascade system that used weird gases like argon and CO2 instead of Freon. He and I got that system down to 50 degrees below zero in the Nevada desert in the summertime. When the U.S. government needs a genius solution, they ask Duck and Goodrich. And when your ghetto technician needs a genius solution, they ask Digital Duncan. Ghetto's been awarded 114 patents for cool stuff we've invented, and we believe number 115 is on the way. Ghetto, G-O-E-T-T-L, will keep you cool, but it's hard to sell.
Is it safe for my daughter?
Have they been thoroughly tested?
Will my grandson be okay if he gets vaccinated? He's still developing.
The short answer to all these questions? Yes. The COVID-19 vaccine is proven to be safe and effective for ages 12 and up. Feeling good about the facts? Visit myturn.ca.gov today to schedule a vaccination appointment or find a walk-in clinic near you. Brought to you by the California Department of Public Health.
Portions of the following program will be recorded. These documents were obtained by the Wall Street Journal using the Freedom of Information Act. You would think that some of the other media here in California should have done the same thing. You have to fill out some paperwork, and they didn't bother. No, there's nobody looking out for you in Southern California, except us. John and Ken. Nobody. Weekdays, 2 to 6 on KFI.
There's a Secure Fence Act of 2006.
And you know who voted for that at the time? Everybody.
It's the democracy of politicians.
It really is. It isn't one side or the other because we started when Obama was in office. There were Republicans who refused to go along with anything that guy did because they didn't like him.
Weekdays at 10 a.m. KFI.
here's the rule. Whenever you vote yes on a proposition, it's really no. Whatever the proposition says, it's not true. If it is citizens for, it has nothing to do with citizens. It's a special interest group saying we are citizens. Bill handles all across. Morning from 6 to 10 on KFI. AM 640.
I know the weight of the world seems to rest on your shoulders, and sometimes life seems like it's filled only with confusion and chaos. But I assure you, I have a plan for you.
The Jesus Christ Show. This morning at 6 on KFI AM 640.
More stimulating talk.
This is KFI AM 640, heard everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. Obviously, these kind of set up so much for the future as well, you know, talking about how other movies build upon that. You know, these monsters themselves, especially as I mentioned from Universal Studios, really just the big classic monsters that have been around since then, right? Different variations as well.
Absolutely, and you know, a lot of these really deal directly with the idea of the other with a capital O. This idea that people who can control the narrative can often turn someone, you know, turn the quote-unquote other into a scapegoat for all kinds of anxieties, right, and project all kinds of fears onto them. And a lot of times these films are really exploring, either directly or indirectly, what happens when the quote other is connected directly to the self, right? Like, you know, you have things like the Invisible Man or the Wolf Man or like cat people even, you know, this idea that the protagonist could be the person who is somehow corrupted and turned into the evil, and then of course you have that basic kind of morality, like moral dilemma being plumbed throughout horror and really built on through, you know, as we get into more modern crises like the environmental crises films of the 50s and 60s and so forth, and then of course then today with all kinds of deconstructions of that idea.
Yeah, let's move on to post-war, kind of this atomic age where we do see a lot of environmental and technology, you know, alien monstrosities. That was a huge factor for even these huge big monster movies like Godzilla, you know, a big impact on Japanese films and things that we saw also here on the American side.
Right, exactly, and I think that's really interesting to think about in terms of how we view, like right now, I think a lot of our anxieties are really apocalyptic, and what's unique about, you know, the Godzilla films is that they arose in the wake of an actual apocalypse, right? Like, this is Japan's kind of attempt to really grapple with, you know, the worst thing that could possibly happen to humanity, having just happened to them, you know, and so Godzilla is really an interesting figure because he represents not only the worst that mankind can do, but he represents sort of the ability to rebuild and to kind of reclaim some control over the atomic age, and he ultimately, you know, in many films later in the franchise becomes kind of a friend to, and like an ally to humans to some degree, so.
We also saw the rise of bad kids, scary kids in the 60s, you know, movies like The Bad Seed and others, you know, Children of the Corn, things like that, so honestly, that's all it films, everything builds upon each other, but, you know, these are the kind of the first times we were seeing these scary kids come up too.
And you think about that as a reaction to, you know, 50s modern housewifery, right? And like the way that in the post-war era, Disney characters are really claiming their territory, you know, suburban moms and so forth. And you have this idea of you know, modern feminism sort of starting seed and taking root in the collective conscious. And the dark underbelly of that, I think, is what we see in these types of movies, where you have these, you know, courageous little girls and boys being raised in these idyllic households, but yet there's something warped and twisted about them, right? And like what that does to the idea of like the modern picket fence family and so forth, right? So,